The hardest battles aren't fought with guns. They're fought in the quiet places. The moments a man realizes he's losing his children to a ghost. Marcus Caldwell learned that lesson the hard way. His wife, Sarah, was gone, taken by a fever that swept through the Wyoming territory like a thief in the night. It left him with a fortune in cattle, 3,000 acres of prime land, and 2 8-year-old twin boys who'd forgotten how to trust the world. Tommy and Billy. Identical in every way, but the shadows in their eyes. They were wild, unreachable. In 6 months, 7 nannies had tried to tame them. 7 women had fled the Caldwell Ranch, broken and sometimes in tears. The boys were experts in rebellion. Snakes found their way into freshly made beds. Clean laundry was mysteriously caked in mud. They could vanish for hours, sending grown women into a panic. Marcus had the biggest ranch for miles, but all his money couldn't buy what he really needed. Someone who could reach his sons, someone who wouldn't break. Then a woman named Clara Ara Whitmore stepped off the evening stagecoach. She carried a single small bag and had eyes that looked like they'd seen their share of storms and hadn't flinched. The boys put a frog in her coffee on the first morning. She didn't scream. They locked her in the barn for 2 hours. She didn't run. There was something different about this quiet woman, something that would either save this broken family or shatter it into pieces. The Caldwell Ranch was a kingdom built from dust and dreams. 3,000 acres of Wyoming's best grazing land, where the grass grew thick and mountain springs ran clear. Marcus had carved it out of nothing, starting with $100 and a will of iron when he was just 19. Now, at 32, he was a man other cattlemen respected, even feared. But he'd trade every last acre to hear his boys laugh the way they used to, back when Sarah was alive. The ranch house sat on a rise overlooking the valley. Built from stone and timber, Marcus had picked himself. Sarah had made it a home. Her touch was still everywhere. The blue curtains in the kitchen, the rocking chair where she'd nursed the twins, the garden that now grew tangled and wild without her hands to tend it. Tommy and Billy were a matched set, identical down to the last freckle. But inside, they were fire and ice. Tommy, older by 7 minutes, had his father's serious gaze and his mother's gentle heart, though he kept both buried deep. Billy was a spark, quick to laugh and quicker to anger, with Sarah's stubborn chin and Marcus's raw determination. They were good boys once, before the fever. Marcus remembered them racing to meet him at the end of the day, tumbling over each other to tell him their stories. Sarah would watch from the porch, a hand on her belly where their 3rd child was growing, a soft smile on her face. The fever hit in April. First, it took the baby. Then it took Sarah. It left Marcus with 2 boys who couldn't understand why their mother was gone. In their small, shattered minds, she had abandoned them. If their own mother could leave, anyone could. And they made it their mission to prove it, driving away every woman who dared try to care for them. Mrs. Henderson, the cook, was the only one who'd lasted. She was a stout woman with iron-gray hair and a heart as soft as her biscuits. She'd been with the family since before the twins were born, but even her patience was wearing thin. The boys had filled her bread pans with dirt and set a plague of grasshoppers loose in her kitchen. Jake Morrison, the ranch foreman, understood their pain. He'd lost his own father young and knew that anger was just a mask for a deeper hurt. But Jake was a man of horses and cattle, not children. When the boys asked him why God had taken their mama, he had no words to give them. Then came Clara Ara Whitmore. She arrived on a Thursday with nothing but a letter from an agency, and a way of looking at a man that made him feel she saw right through him. She was maybe 28, with plain brown hair and a dress that was clean, but mended in a dozen places. Her hands were strong, capable, and on her left ring finger, a pale band of skin told a story of a ring that was no longer there. Marcus interviewed her in his study, the same room where he'd fired the last 7. She sat straight and still, answering his questions with a quiet honesty that unnerved him. She'd been a teacher, not a nanny. She had no family, no ties that would pull her away. "Why do you want this job?" he'd asked, his voice rough. She paused, choosing her words like stones for a river crossing. "Children need stability, Mr. Caldwell. They need to know someone will be there tomorrow. I can give them that." The boys launched their attack the moment she stepped inside. Billy, hidden on the stairs, armed with a slingshot and dried beans. Tommy, under a table, with a jar of pond water and 3 very active frogs. They soaked her skirt and plopped a frog right into her coffee cup. Clara Ara didn't even flinch. She just looked down at the frog, then at the 2 sets of eyes peering from their hiding places. "Well," she said, her voice calm as a summer morning, "I suppose they'll need names. Every frog should have a proper name, don't you think?" The boys crept out from their hiding spots, their plan for chaos derailed by simple curiosity. No one had ever reacted like this. "This one has the biggest eyes," Clara Ara said, gently scooping the frog from her coffee. "He looks like a Frederick. What do you think?" That evening, Marcus watched from the shadows as Clara Ara sat with his sons at the kitchen table. She wasn't scolding them. She was helping them design a proper frog habitat on a piece of brown paper. "Frogs aren't meant for coffee cups," she explained seriously, "no matter how fine the china." Tommy let out a real laugh, the first Marcus had heard in months. Billy leaned against her chair, his usual defiance replaced by fascination. Later, after the boys went to bed without a single fight, Marcus found her in the parlor, unpacking her small bag. "They're good boys," she said, not looking up. "They're just afraid." Marcus sank into his worn leather chair. "Afraid of what?" "Of caring about someone who might leave them," she said, folding a nightgown. "It's easier to drive people away before they have the chance to go." Her words were a punch to the gut, because he saw the same fear in himself. He avoided this room most nights. Sarah's ghost was too strong here. He worked until he collapsed, just to avoid the silence. "The last nanny said they were incorrigible," he muttered. Clara Ara finally looked at him, and a small warm smile touched her lips. "Incorrigible children are just children who haven't been understood. Your boys are brilliant and creative. They test people to find their breaking point before they let themselves get attached." She closed her bag. "I don't break easily, Mr. Caldwell." That night the house was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in 2 years, it felt like a home again. Marcus sat alone in his study, wondering if this fragile peace could possibly last. Upstairs in her small room, Clara Ara sat by the window. She pulled a small wooden music box from her bag, its surface worn smooth. She wound the key, and a gentle lullaby filled the silence. The same song she used to sing to another child in another life, before fire and smoke had taken everything from her. Inside the music box was not a dancing ballerina, but a simple gold wedding band. Sarah's wedding band, the one Marcus couldn't bear to put away. But Clara didn't know that. Just as Marcus didn't know about the silver locket she wore hidden beneath her dress, or the secrets she wrote in a journal at the bottom of her bag. Tomorrow, the boys would test her again. But tonight, in a house drowning in sorrow, hope had just taken its first, shaky breath. Clara Ara's third morning started with a new round of tests, salt in the sugar bowl, soap smeared on the doorknobs, a very lifelike rubber snake coiled on her pillow. Each time she met their mischief with unnerving calm, complimenting their creativity while quietly cleaning up the mess. But this morning was different. Tommy wasn't at the breakfast table. Billy sat there, stabbing at his oatmeal, his small face a thundercloud. "Where's your brother?" Clara Ara asked, carefully inspecting her coffee cup for new residents. Don't know. Don't care, Billy mumbled. Mrs. Henderson came in from the kitchen, wringing her hands. He won't come down. Locked himself in his room. Won't even answer for molasses cakes. Clara Ara felt it then. A shift in the house's sorrowful currents. An invisible storm had broken in the night, and Tommy was at its center. I'll go to him, she said. Good luck, Billy muttered. Papa says to just leave him be when he gets like this. But Clara Ara knew better. She knew that leaving a child be was sometimes the cruelest thing you could do. She climbed the stairs to their room and knocked softly. Tommy, it's Miss Clara Ara. May I come in? Only silence answered. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside the neat room. 2 beds, a dresser covered in boyish treasures, a window looking out over the corrals. But no Tommy. She checked under the beds, in the closet. Nothing. Then she heard it. A tiny, muffled sniffle from behind the heavy oak dresser. Tommy? She kept her voice as gentle as a whisper. Are you back there? He was curled into a tight ball in the narrow space, clutching a small carved wooden horse to his chest. His face was streaked with tears, his body trembling with silent sobs. Clara Ara sank to the floor, making herself small. Oh, honey, what is it? He just shook his head, burying his face against the horse. Did you have a bad dream? She asked. He shook his head again, but this time he peeked at her. His eyes were wide and full of a pain that was too big for his small body. Clara Ara waited. She knew this kind of quiet. It was the sound of a child deciding whether or not to trust. I heard you, Tommy whispered, his voice cracking. I heard you crying last night. Clara Ara's heart seized. She had cried. Silently, she thought, into her pillow, as the memories of her own lost family came for her in the dark. She thought no one had heard. I'm so sorry you heard that, she said, her voice thick with honesty. Sometimes grown-ups cry too when they miss people. Tommy finally looked at her, his eyes swimming with tears that hadn't fallen yet. Who do you miss? The question was a bridge, fragile and terrifying, built between their 2 lonely worlds. Clara Ara looked at this broken little boy and made a choice that would change everything. I had a little girl once, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her name was Emma. She was about your age. Tommy's breath hitched. Where is she now? The words were like swallowing glass. She died, Tommy, in a fire, with my husband. His small hands loosened their grip on the wooden horse. That's why you're here, he stated, not a question. Because you don't have them anymore. Partly, she admitted, and partly because I heard about 2 little boys who needed someone who wouldn't leave. He studied her face, trying to unlock the secrets behind her sad eyes. This was Mama's, he said finally, holding out the wooden horse. She made it for me. It was beautifully carved, the paint worn smooth by his own small hands. Clara Ara could feel the love that had been poured into the simple toy. It's beautiful, Tommy. Your mama must have loved you so much. She did, he whispered, but then she went away. Not because she wanted to, Clara Ara said, her voice firm with a certainty he desperately needed to hear. Sometimes people have to leave, even when it's the last thing in the world they want to do. Your mama would have stayed forever if she could have. He crawled out from behind the dresser and pressed his small, warm body against her side. Billy says you'll leave too, soon as you find out how awful we are. She wrapped an arm around him, pulling him tight. Do you know what I think? I think you and Billy aren't awful at all. I think you're just scared. We're not scared, he protested, but the words had no fight in them. It's okay to be scared, she soothed. When I lost my family, I was so scared I thought I'd never breathe right again. I thought, If I just never loved anyone else, then it couldn't hurt that much again. Does it work? He asked, his voice muffled against her dress. She thought of the long, gray months she'd spent wandering, her heart locked in a cage of her own making. No, she said honestly. It just makes everything empty. He snuggled closer. I don't want you to go away. I don't want to go away either. A small, choked sound came from the doorway. Billy stood there, his face crumpled, the tears he'd been fighting all morning finally winning. I heard, he croaked, about your little girl. Clara Ara opened her other arm, and Billy collapsed into her embrace, clinging to her with the desperation of a starving child offered a feast. She held them both, these two broken boys, and felt the tight, cold knot of her own grief begin to loosen for the first time in 3 years. Something was shifting, something was healing. The wooden horse was pressed between them, and for a moment it felt warm, as if Sarah's love was still alive inside it, giving its blessing. From downstairs they heard Marcus's boots on the porch. The boys stiffened in her arms, their old fears snapping back into place. Your father loves you so much, Clara Ara whispered to them. But he's scared too. He's afraid if he lets himself love you too much, he'll lose you, just like he lost your mama. We're not going anywhere, Tommy declared with a fierce, sudden loyalty. Then maybe, Clara Ara said, a new idea taking root. We need to show him that. All of us, together. Billy pulled back, his tear-stained face lit with a flicker of hope. You mean it? You'll stay? For real? She looked from his hopeful face to Tommy's, and she knew she was making a promise that could never be broken. I mean it. We're a family now, and families don't give up on each other. When they went downstairs, a strange little procession with Billy holding her hand and Tommy clutching the wooden horse, Marcus was in the kitchen, his face a mask of worry. Everything all right? He asked, his eyes searching hers for the familiar signs of defeat. Everything's fine, Clara Ara said, and this time she meant it with her whole soul. Better than fine. We were just getting to know each other. Marcus looked at his sons, really looked at them, and for the first time in 2 years he saw it. Hope. Fragile and new, but it was there, shining in their eyes. Well then, he said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't name. I suppose we'd better have some breakfast. As they sat around the table, a feeling of celebration settled over the room. The war was not over. But a truce had been called. The walls they had all built around their hearts were starting to crumble, brick by painful brick. And in the ruins, something new and beautiful was starting to grow. 2 weeks passed. The ranch found a new rhythm, a quiet hum of healing. Clara Ara didn't rule with an iron fist. She led with gentle consistency. Mornings were no longer battles. A cowboy needs a clean face to meet the day, she'd say, and suddenly, washing was an adventure, not a chore. She turned Sarah's old sewing room into what she called ranch school. Arithmetic was taught by calculating feed costs. Geography was learned by tracing cattle trails on old maps. Why can't real school be like this? Tommy asked one day, his slate filled with numbers. Because real school teachers don't know that a fence post needs to be sunk 3 feet deep, Clara Ara replied with a smile. Billy looked up from a book of frontier adventures. Will you still be here when we're old enough for real school? The question dropped into the quiet room like a stone in a pond. Across the house, Marcus, pretending to be absorbed in his ledgers, went perfectly still. That depends, Clara Ara said carefully, on whether you still need me. We'll always need you, Tommy blurted out, with the fierce certainty only a child can possess. Clara Ara's heart did a painful squeeze. She'd made them a promise, but life had taught her that promises were made of glass. That night she sat in her room, writing in the leather-bound journal that held all her secrets. She wrote to her lost daughter, Emma, like she did every night. "My darling girl," she wrote, "I have found the most remarkable boys. They have been hurt, Emma, just like I was. Maybe that's why I can see the goodness in them so clearly. Their father, he is a good man, but he has built walls around his heart so high, I don't know if anyone can climb them. I see him watching us, and sometimes I feel like I might be home. For the first time since the fire, I feel like I might belong somewhere again." She closed the journal, the fragile hope, a tender ache in her chest. Downstairs, Marcus roamed the quiet house. He paused outside her door, hearing the faint scratch of her pen. He wondered what secrets she poured onto those pages. She was changing everything, not just for his boys, but for him. He found himself looking forward to meals, to the sound of her voice reading stories, to the way she listened when he spoke of the ranch, as if his dreams mattered. The love he'd had for Sarah was the fiery passion of youth. This feeling for Clara Ara was different, quieter, deeper, tempered by loss and the bitter knowledge of how quickly everything could be taken away. He was starting to feel again, and it terrified him. The next morning, a black carriage kicked up dust as it approached the ranch, looking as out of place as a tuxedo at a barn dance. Edmund Hayes stepped out. He was a man who wore his money like a suit of armor, expensive clothes, a gold watch chain, a silver-headed cane he didn't need. Marcus met him on the porch, his body a rigid line of defense. "Caldwell," Hayes said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "I trust you've considered my offer to buy this place." "The ranch isn't for sale, Hayes. I told you that 6 months ago." Hayes smiled, a cold, empty thing. "Things change. Cattle prices are down, and a man with 2 boys has expenses." His eyes flickered to the window, where he could see Clara with the boys. "I see you've found another nanny, a pretty one. How long before this one runs screaming?" Marcus's jaw went tight as iron. "Miss Whitmore is their teacher, and she's part of this family." "Family?" Hayes let out a soft, mocking laugh. "That's touching. Tell me, does your new family member know about your financial troubles, about the mortgage you took out when your wife was sick?" The blood drained from Marcus's face. The mortgage was his shame, his secret. A desperate choice made when the doctor's bills piled up and the market crashed. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus choked out. But his voice was a lie, and they both knew it. Hayes pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "Funny thing about debt, Caldwell. It changes hands. I bought your note from the bank last week. You have 60 days to pay the full amount, $3,000, or I foreclose." The world spun under Marcus's feet. $3,000. He might as well have asked for the moon. "That's not legal. I have a payment plan with the bank." "You had a plan," Hayes corrected, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The sale of the note voids that agreement. It's all there in the fine print. Of course," he added, "I'm a reasonable man. My original offer to buy the ranch still stands. 2,000. It's less than you owe, but it will keep you out of a debtor's prison." Through the window, Clara saw Marcus's face turn ashen. She didn't hear the words, but she saw the devastation. She started for the door, her own protective instincts roaring to life. "Think about the boys, Caldwell," Hayes said, climbing back into his carriage. "What becomes of them when you lose everything?" He drove away, leaving Marcus on the porch, a man watching his world burn down around him. Clara found him there, staring at the legal document as if it were a venomous snake. "Marcus, what is it?" He looked at her, his eyes hollow with shame. "I'm going to lose the ranch, Clara. Hayes owns my debt. I have 60 days to pay him $3,000. She took the paper, her teacher's mind cutting through the legal jargon. This is predatory, she seethed. He's using a loophole to steal your land. It's legal, Marcus said, his voice dead. And I don't have the money. How much do you have? He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Maybe 800, if I sell every last cow and board on this place. She folded the paper and handed it back to him. Her eyes were not filled with pity. They were filled with fire. Then we'll find another way. We? He stared at her. Clara Ara, this is my mess, not yours. Yes, it is, she said, her voice quiet but fierce as a hawk. Those boys in there are my family. This ranch is my home. I found something here worth fighting for. A crack appeared in the wall around Marcus's heart. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, she cut him off. I'm choosing. We're a family, remember? And families don't give up. That afternoon, as Marcus rode the range like a man trying to outrun his own shadow, Clara Ara sat at her desk. She opened her journal, but she didn't write to Emma. She began to compose a different kind of letter. A letter that was a prayer, a gamble, a declaration of war, a letter that just might save them all. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, but a heavy dread hung over the ranch. Marcus had spent the night staring at the ceiling, the impossible number, $3,000, chanting in his head like a funeral dirge. He walked into the kitchen to find Clara Ara dressed in a simple blue cotton dress that made her eyes look like the summer sky. The boys were scrubbed clean and stuffed into their Sunday clothes, Billy already tugging at his stiff collar. We're going to church, Clara Ara announced quietly. Marcus looked up from his coffee, the first protest already on his lips. He hadn't been inside that church since Sarah's funeral. The place was a monument to his biggest failure, his deepest loss. Faith felt like a cruel joke. The boys need routine, she said, cutting off his argument before it began. And sometimes, the answers we need find us when we stop looking so hard for them. Papa used to take us every Sunday, Tommy said softly, before Mama went to heaven. The words were a gut punch. Sarah had always said that. Church is where families go, to remember they're not alone. He looked at Clara Ara, at the quiet strength in her face. I don't know if I can, he admitted, his voice raw. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. The simple touch was an anchor in his swirling sea of panic. We don't have to be ready, she said. We just have to be willing. An hour later, they walked into Pine Creek's little wooden church as a family. Conversation hushed, eyes turned. The Caldwells hadn't been seen in public together in 2 years, and the town was hungry with curiosity about the mysterious new woman at Marcus's side. Reverend Williams greeted them at the door, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Marcus, it's good to see you, son. He looked at Clara Ara. And you must be Miss Whitmore. We've heard you're the only one brave enough to handle those boys. Clara Ara smiled, unshaken by the scrutiny. They're wonderful boys, Reverend. Any teacher would be lucky. They sat in a pew near the back. The old hymn started, and Marcus found himself listening to his son's clear voices blending with Clara's alto. It was a sound he thought he'd never hear again. A sound of home. The sermon was about bearing one another's burdens, but all Marcus could hear was the ticking clock of Hayes's deadline. Then Clara Ara's hand found his again, a silent message of support. He looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused from work, hers stained with chalk and ink, and felt a flicker of something he'd long forgotten. It wasn't quite hope, but it was the possibility of it. After the service, the townspeople didn't offer pity. They offered warmth. Your boys look well, Marcus, said the banker's wife, her eyes full of approval for Clara. Miss Clara knows everything, Billy announced proudly. Frogs and math, and how to make biscuits that don't taste like rocks. Old man Garrett, who owned the next ranch over, clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "You look alive again, son. Sometimes the good Lord sends us what we need, even when we're too stubborn to ask." Walking home, a comfortable silence settled between them. "Thank you," Marcus said finally, "for making me come." "Community matters," she replied, "especially when things are hard." She stopped walking, her expression serious. "Marcus, what do you really know about me?" The question caught him off guard. "Only what you told me, that you were a teacher, that you lost your family." She pulled a folded letter from her small purse. "I haven't been entirely honest." She handed it to him. The postmark was from Boston. The letterhead bore the seal of the Pemberton Academy for Young Ladies, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. It was addressed to Miss Clara R. Whitmore, former head of the lower school. It was an urgent plea for her to return, with a staggering salary offer. Head of the lower school? Marcus stared at her, seeing a completely different woman. "For 8 years," she said quietly. "I had a good life, a beautiful home, respect, security, everything." "Then why did you leave?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The fire," she whispered, her throat tight. "It happened there, in Boston. My husband taught at Harvard. We had a house, our daughter, Emma. One night the chimney caught fire. They died in their sleep. I only survived because I was working late at the school." Marcus's heart broke for her all over again. "Oh, Clara Ara." "I couldn't stay," she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Everything was a memory, so I just left. I walked away and never looked back." "But this letter," he said, the paper feeling heavy in his hand. "They want you back. They're offering a fortune." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "The headmistress has been writing for months. They'll hold the position for me until the fall." "You have to take it," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It's a second chance at the life you lost." She turned to him then, her gray eyes searching his. "Is that what you want me to do, Marcus?" He wanted to be noble, to tell her to go, to be safe. But the thought of the ranch without her, of his boys' faces when she said goodbye, it was a void he couldn't bear. "I think," he said, his voice careful, "that you have to decide what kind of life you want. The safe one you had before, or the messy, uncertain one you're building here, with us." The word "us" hung in the air between them, full of unspoken promises. A door inside Clara Ara's heart, locked and bolted for 3 years, creaked open. "The boys don't know about this," she said finally. "Are you going to tell them?" She watched Tommy help Billy up after a fall, their easy laughter floating on the wind. "Not yet," she said. "Right now, we have a ranch to save." That night, Marcus found her in the parlor, her family Bible open on her lap. She was pressing the wildflowers the boys had picked for her between its smoke-stained pages. "What are you writing in your journal?" he asked softly. "A letter to my daughter," she answered without hesitation. "It helps me feel like she's still here." He understood completely. "I talk to Sarah sometimes," he admitted. "Out on the range. I ask her what she would do." "And what does she tell you?" Clara Ara asked. He gave a sad smile. "She tells me to fight. She'd say this ranch, this family, it's worth any sacrifice." "Then we fight," Clara Ara said, her voice as solid as the mountains around them. They sat in the quiet, the firelight dancing on their faces, two lonely people realizing they weren't so lonely anymore. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled, but inside, a fragile alliance was being forged into something much, much stronger. June settled over the ranch, bringing long days and the scent of wildflowers. Life fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for lessons, afternoons for chores. The boys were changing. The frantic, sharp edges of their grief were smoothing away, replaced by the sturdy confidence of being loved and needed. They laughed more. They fought less. They were healing. Marcus found himself watching Clara Ara constantly, the way she braided her hair in the morning light, the musical cadence of her voice when she read to the boys at night, the quiet strength in her hands as she worked in the garden Sarah had planted. He was falling for her, and the feeling was a terrifying, exhilarating freefall. One morning, they sat at the kitchen table, Marcus with his ledgers and Clara Ara with her lesson plans. A small silver locket she always wore glinted at her throat. "The boys are thriving," she said, her face glowing with pride. "Tommy has a real gift for numbers." "Sarah's head for figures," Marcus murmured, a memory that no longer brought a sharp sting of pain, but a gentle warmth. "And Billy," she continued, "has the eye of an artist." She paused, her gaze softening. "You look exhausted, Marcus." He rubbed his eyes. "Hard to sleep when you're trying to figure out how to pull $3,000 out of thin air." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. The simple contact sent a jolt through him. "We will find a way." "Clara, no," he said, pulling his hand back. "I won't let you sacrifice your future in Boston for my mistakes." "What if it's not a sacrifice?" she asked, her voice low. "What if it's an investment?" Before he could answer, the chain of her locket snagged and it fell open on the table. He saw it for just a second before she snatched it shut. A tiny photograph of a man with kind eyes and a little girl with Clara Ara's smile. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "It's all right," she said, her cheeks flushed, clutching the locket in her fist. But she wanted to tell him. She needed to. "His name was Thomas," she whispered. "He taught literature, wrote poetry. Emma, our daughter, she would have been 11 this year." The pain in her voice was a raw, open wound. "When I lost them," she said, looking out the window at Tommy and Billy building a fort of old fence posts, "I thought that part of my life was over forever. The feeling of being part of something bigger than myself." She turned back to him, her eyes shining. "But it's not gone. It's just different." He saw his sons then, not as problems to be solved, but as she saw them, bright, loving boys who had been brought back to life by her belief in them. "Clara," he started, the words he needed stuck in his throat. The kitchen door burst open, and Billy charged in. "Papa! Miss Clara Ara! Come see our fort! It's the best fort ever!" The fragile moment shattered, but as they followed the boys outside, Marcus and Clara Ara shared a smile, a silent understanding passing between them. The fort was a masterpiece of childhood engineering. "This is where we keep the treasure," Billy announced, producing a wooden box. Inside were rocks, feathers, a bit of fool's gold, and Sarah's carved wooden horse. "Everything that matters," Billy said with grave importance. "Everything that matters." For a few hours, Marcus forgot the debt. He forgot Hayes. He was a pirate king, storming the fort, his laughter mingling with his son's and with Clara's. The sound of her laughing, free and joyous, was a balm to his weary soul. But the real world came roaring back when Jake rode in from the south pasture. "Rustlers," he said, his face grim. "Hit the Garrett place last night. Took 30 head." The joy of the morning evaporated. They couldn't afford to lose a single cow, not with Hayes's deadline hanging over them like a guillotine. That night on the porch, Marcus stared into the darkness, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Clara Ara sat beside him. "About this morning," he began, his voice rough. "When your locket opened, I just want you to know, I understand what it cost you to be here. I don't expect you to forget them." She was quiet for a long moment. "Do you still love Sarah?" The question was a clean, sharp blade. Yes, he answered honestly. I'll always love her. She gave me my sons. He turned to her, the moonlight catching the sorrow in his eyes. But loving her doesn't mean my heart is dead. It took you to make it start beating again. I'm scared, Marcus, she whispered. So am I, he said, taking her hand. Their fingers intertwined. But I think being scared of something worth having is better than being safe with nothing at all. What do we do about Hayes? She asked. We fight, he said, his voice hard as stone. We fight for this. For us. Us, she repeated softly. If you'll have us, Marcus said, his voice breaking. All of us, with our broken parts and our ghosts and our uncertain future. She thought of the letter from Boston, of the safe, quiet life that awaited her there. Then she looked at this good, broken man who was learning how to love again, and she made her choice. Yes, she breathed, I'll have you. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it stole her breath. They sat there, hands clasped, while the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines, finally brave enough to believe its promises. The next morning, 2 men in dark suits arrived. Land assessors, vultures. Hayes was wasting no time. Marcus met them in the yard, his body a wall of anger. When he came back inside, his face was the color of ash. They valued everything, he said, his voice flat. The land, the cattle, the house, $2,800. Clara Ara's blood ran cold. That's robbery. This land alone is worth twice that. Doesn't matter, Marcus said, slumping into a chair. Hayes controls the debt. He controls the price. He wants this land, Clara Ara, and he will not stop. But why? She demanded. Why this ranch? He was quiet for a moment. Sarah figured it out, just before she died. There's a new railroad route coming through this valley. Whoever owns this land controls everything. Water rights, access. Hayes isn't buying a ranch, he's buying an empire. That afternoon, Clara Ara drove the wagon into town. She wasn't going for supplies. She was going to see Eleanor Morrison, the town's elderly, sharp-as-a-tack historian. I wondered when you'd come see me, Eleanor said, pouring tea. The whole town is talking about the miracle you've worked at the Caldwell place. Clara Ara got straight to the point. What do you know about Edmund Hayes? Eleanor's face hardened. That man is a plague. He's been gobbling up ranches for 2 years, always legally, but never rightly. Clara Ara explained Marcus's situation. Eleanor listened, her teacup trembling with indignation. It's his pattern, she declared. He finds a weakness, a debt, and he exploits it. The Peterson Ranch, the Murphy homestead. Same story. He's not just buying land, my dear. He's stealing it. Eleanor went to a large cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. I've been keeping my own records on Mr. Hayes. Inside were deeds, mortgage transfers, and railroad survey permits. Separately, they're just business deals. But together, she smiled grimly. They tell a story of conspiracy. She pulled out a letter. Hayes made a mistake. He put his plans in writing to an associate in Denver. I acquired a copy. Clara Ara read it, her heart pounding. It was all there. Hayes explicitly detailed how he was using insider railroad information to time his foreclosures. This is it, she breathed. This is the proof. It's proof he's a snake, Eleanor cautioned. But proving criminal fraud is another matter. However, it might be enough to get the territorial attorney general interested. An investigation could delay the foreclosure. How do we get it to him? Carefully, Eleanor said. And quickly. Hayes has powerful friends. As Clara Ara left, Eleanor grabbed her hand. Be careful, my dear. Men like Hayes don't like obstacles, especially intelligent, determined female ones. Driving back to the ranch, Clara Ara's mind raced. The evidence was strong, but it wasn't a guarantee. And even if they delayed the foreclosure, they still needed the money. Her hand went to her purse, where the letter from Boston lay. The job came with a $1,500 signing bonus. Half of what they needed. But taking it meant leaving Marcus, leaving the boys. The thought was a physical pain. She found Marcus on the porch, waiting. "I may have found something," she said, and told him everything. Hope flickered in his eyes, warring with years of weary skepticism. "You think this could really work?" "I think," she said, taking a deep breath. "It's our only shot." She pulled out the letter from Boston. "And if it doesn't, there's this, the position. It comes with a signing bonus, $1,500. He stared at the letter as if she'd handed him a lit stick of dynamite. You're thinking of going back?" "I'm thinking of doing whatever it takes to save this family," she said, her voice shaking with the force of her conviction. "The question is, will you let me?" He took the letter, his hands trembling. He read it, then folded it carefully and handed it back. "This is your future, Clara Ara. Your security. I can't let you throw that away for me." "Our problems," she corrected, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I love you, Marcus. I love your sons. I love this life we're building, the money, the job. That's just stuff. This," she pressed a hand to his chest, "this is life." The last of his walls crumbled. "Clara Ara," he choked out. "Say you love me too," she whispered. "Say it's not just gratitude or loneliness." He cupped her face in his rough hands. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion so powerful it stunned them both. "I love your courage, your kindness. I love that you made my sons remember how to be children. I love that you made me remember how to hope." She rose on her toes and kissed him. A kiss that was not about desperation, but about choice. A kiss that tasted of second chances and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "What now?" he whispered. She smiled, her eyes blazing. "Now," she said, "we fight for what's ours." A special courier from the territorial capital arrived on a Tuesday morning. The envelope had the Attorney General's official seal. Clara Ara held it in her hands, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope. "Together," Marcus said, his hand covering hers. She broke the seal. Her eyes flew across the page, her expression shifting from hope to confusion to stunned disbelief. "What is it?" Marcus pressed. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "They're not just interested. They're launching a full investigation, and listen to this." She read aloud, her voice trembling. "The court hereby issues a temporary injunction, preventing any foreclosure actions on properties currently under investigation, effective immediately." "An injunction," Marcus breathed, the words like a prayer. "He can't touch us. Hayes can't touch the ranch." The air in the kitchen seemed to crackle with relief. "We have time, Marcus. We have real time." The back door burst open, and the boys tumbled in, their faces alight with discovery. "Papa! Miss Clara Ara! Come see what we found in the old barn." For once, Marcus didn't try to quiet them. "Show us," Clara Ara said, the letter clutched in her hand like a holy relic. "Show us everything." In a dusty corner of the old barn, half buried under rotting grain sacks, was an old oak trunk. "We were looking for rope for our fort," Tommy explained. The lock was rusted through. Billy pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of papers. "Land deeds," Clara Ara said, her voice hushed with reverence as she examined the top document. Original deeds for half the county. Marcus leaned over her shoulder. Some of these are 30 years old. Then Clara Ara pulled out another document, this one a map. Marcus, look, it's a railroad survey from 1869. A cold dread washed over Marcus. That's 10 years before Hayes even came to this territory. This proves he knew about the railroad all along. He's been planning this for a decade. It proves premeditation, Clara Ara said, her eyes flashing. It proves fraud. Are these treasure maps? Billy asked, sensing the electric tension in the air. Oh, much better than that, sweetheart, Clara Ara said, a fierce smile on her face. They're proof that the bad man trying to take our home is nothing but a common thief. Suddenly the sound of hoofbeats pounded in the yard. Not one rider, but several, coming in fast. Marcus's hand went to the pistol on his hip. They had won a battle, but the war, he knew, was far from over. 3 weeks passed under the fragile protection of the injunction. A strange, beautiful peace settled over the ranch. Without the immediate threat, the fractured pieces of their family finally clicked into place. They moved through their days as a single unit, a team. One evening, Marcus found Clara Ara in her small study, writing in her journal. "What does the letter I'll never get to read say tonight?" he asked softly. She looked up, and the love in her eyes still had the power to take his breath away. "It says that I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone," she whispered. "That your boys have healed a part of me I thought was dead forever, and that this is home." "Clara," he said, his voice thick. "Come with me." He led her to his study, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he opened the large safe. He took out a small wooden music box. This was Sarah's. He wound the key, and the gentle notes of Amazing Grace filled the room. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a simple gold band. "She kept her wedding ring in here," he said. "Sarah was my past, Clara Ara, and I will always honor that." He carefully removed the ring. "But you are my future." From his vest pocket he pulled out a different ring, this one with a single perfect sapphire the color of her eyes. "I had this made. It's not borrowed from yesterday, Clara. It's ours." He knelt before her. Tears streamed down her face as he held the ring between them. "Marry me," he said, his voice shaking. "Not because my boys need a mother, but because I need you. I love you with everything that I am." She slid from her chair to kneel in front of him, her answer in her eyes before she even spoke the word. "Yes," she breathed, laughing through her tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, absolutely, yes." He kissed her then, a kiss that sealed every promise they had made and would ever make. 2 small heads peeked around the doorframe. "Are you getting married?" Tommy asked, his voice filled with a child's pure hope. They opened their arms and the boys flew into their embrace. "Are you going to be our real mama now?" Billy asked, burying his head in her lap. "I've been your real mama since the day I met you," she whispered, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The sound of a single horse, ridden hard, shattered the perfect moment. Jake Morrison burst through the door, his face pale and grim. "Marcus, we've got trouble." Marcus was on his feet, instantly shielding his new family. "What is it?" "It's Hayes. He's filed an emergency petition with a crooked judge. Claims the injunction was fraudulent. He's coming tomorrow morning, with a federal marshal to throw you off this land." The joy in the room curdled into ice. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. 12 hours, maybe less." Clara Ara stood, the teacher, the strategist, taking command. "Then we use every second. Jake, how fast can you ride?" "As fast as the devil himself is chasing me." "Good," she said, already at Marcus's desk, her pen flying across paper. "Take these messages to Eleanor. She needs to send 3 telegrams tonight. 1 to the Attorney General, 1 to the Federal Land Office, and 1," she paused, looking at Marcus, "to a man named James Harrington, in Boston." "What are you planning?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with dread. She looked up, and her eyes were the eyes of a warrior. "Hayes thinks he can win because he's rigging the game," she said. "It's time he found out we have more players on our side than he ever imagined." Dawn broke gray and angry. The telegrams had arrived in the night, a chain of riders organized by Eleanor. The AG was investigating Hayes's petition, but a marshal had to enforce a court order. The land office was concerned. But the 3rd telegram made Clara Ara's hands shake. It was from James Harrington, the powerful railroad investor whose family she had once tutored. It was short and cryptic. "Irregularities confirmed. Federal investigators dispatched. Hold position. Help is coming." "Will they get here in time?" Marcus asked, his face grim. Before she could answer, they heard them, a dozen riders cresting the hill. Hayes, a federal marshal, and 10 hired guns. "Get the boys inside," Marcus ordered. "Stay there." He and Clara Ara walked onto the porch together, a united front. Hayes sat on his horse, a smug smile on his face. The marshal, a tired-looking man, read the order. "You are required to vacate this property immediately." Before Marcus could explode, Clara Ara stepped forward. "Marshal Garrett," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Before you execute that order, I believe you should be aware that it was obtained through criminal fraud." Hayes laughed. "Marshal, this woman has no legal standing." "Actually," Clara Ara said smoothly, "as the intended bride of Mr. Caldwell, I have every right to speak for this family." She held up the packet of documents from the old trunk. "Are you familiar with federal statutes regarding land fraud, Marshal? Because these original railroad surveys and deeds show that Mr. Hayes has been engaged in a decade-long conspiracy to illegally acquire this land." The marshal dismounted, his expression troubled. He took the papers, his practiced eye recognizing their authenticity. "Where did you get these?" "They were hidden on this property," Clara said, "by a man who knew Mr. Hayes was a crook." Hayes spurred his horse forward. "This is a delaying tactic." "Sir, I will do my job," the marshal snapped. "And right now, that involves investigating these very serious allegations." Clara pressed her advantage. "Furthermore, I have been in communication with James Harrington of the Harrington Railroad Group. Federal investigators are on their way here at his personal request." The name Harrington hit Hayes like a physical blow. The smile vanished from his face. "You're lying," he hissed. Clara Ara produced the telegram. "Would you like to read it yourself?" The marshal took it, his frown deepening. He looked at Hayes, his eyes now cold with suspicion. "Mr. Hayes, I am now required to suspend this eviction pending a full investigation into these claims." Hayes's face turned purple with rage. He made a subtle gesture to his men. Hands drifted towards pistols. "Marshal," he snarled, "this is a lawless territory. Accidents happen." The threat was naked, ugly. The marshal's own hand went to his gun. "Are you threatening a federal officer, sir?" The air crackled. The world held its breath. Then, another sound. The thunder of more horses, a lot of them, coming fast from town. At the head of the posse was Sheriff Williams. Behind him were 24 men, ranchers, storekeepers, the banker, even the Reverend. "Marshal Garrett!" the sheriff called out, dismounting. "I believe this is for you." He handed the marshal a document. "It's a territorial warrant for the arrest of Edmund Hayes on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and bribery." Hayes went white. "That's impossible." "Turns out you put too much in writing, Eddie," the sheriff said grimly. The attorney general was very interested to learn how you've been buying judges. You're under arrest, Mr. Hayes, the marshal said, his voice flat. For one terrifying second, Hayes looked like he might fight. His hired guns tensed. Then they looked at the 24 rifles pointed at them from the town posse, and their nerve broke. They turned their horses and fled. Let them go, the marshal said. We have the man we want. Hayes was pulled from his horse, his hands bound behind his back. As the sheriff led him away, he looked small, a pathetic bully stripped of his power. The nightmare was over. Tommy and Billy burst from the house and threw themselves into Marcus and Clara Ara's arms. Is the bad man gone forever? Billy cried. Forever, Clara Ara promised, her voice choked with tears of relief. The ranch was safe. Their family was whole. Marcus pulled her close, his arms shaking. So, he whispered into her hair, a rough, beautiful sound. About that wedding. The wedding was 6 weeks later, on a perfect August morning. The entire county came. The ceremony was in the meadow beneath the old oak tree, the same spot where Marcus had first proposed to Sarah all those years ago. It wasn't a place of ghosts anymore. It was a place of new beginnings. Clara Ara wore a simple ivory dress and the silver locket at her throat, her past held close to her heart as she stepped into her future. Marcus stood waiting for her, his eyes full of a love so profound it made her weak in the knees. Billy, the ring-bearer, stood beside him, a pillar of puffed-up importance. When it was time for the vows, Marcus's voice was strong and clear. Clara Ara, you came into our lives when we were lost in the dark. You taught my sons to trust again. You taught me how to love again. You made us whole. Clara Ara's own vows were a promise, whispered from the deepest part of her soul. Marcus, you and your boys gave me back my purpose. You showed me that a heart can break and still learn to beat again, stronger than before. I promise to cherish you, to love your children as my own, and to build a life with you that honors all we have lost and celebrates everything we have found. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss was a gentle seal on a sacred promise. Tommy came forward with a gift, a small hand-carved frame. Inside was a child's drawing of the four of them, holding hands under a smiling sun. At the bottom, in careful printing, it said, "Our family forever." It's perfect, Clara Ara whispered, the happy tears finally falling. Do we call you Mama now? Billy asked, tugging on her dress. She knelt and pulled both boys into her arms. You call me whatever is in your heart, she said. I am yours now, no matter the name. As the sun set, painting the sky gold and rose, Marcus found her on the porch steps, watching the boys chase fireflies. Any regrets? He asked softly, wrapping his arms around her. About Boston, about the life you gave up. She looked out at the rolling hills of her home, at the boys who were her sons, at the man who was her husband. None, she said, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones. This is where I belong. I just had to take the long way home. 2 years later, Clara Ara stood on that same porch, a hand resting on the swell of her belly. The Wyoming Territory was now a state. The ranch was thriving. And the house was filled with a constant, joyful noise. Marcus rode up from the pasture, his face weathered and handsome, his eyes full of contentment. How are my girls this morning? He asked, kissing her. They had decided it was a girl, a shared and happy certainty. Tommy and Billy, now 10, came racing around the house, dirt-streaked and grinning. Mama, Papa, we found a real gold nugget in the creek. We're putting it in the family treasure box, Billy declared, with Mama Sarah's horse and our wedding picture. The mail rider brought a letter. It was from Boston, from the Pemberton Academy, sealed with wax. Clara Ara opened it, her expression shifting to one of pure astonishment. "What is it?" Marcus asked. She looked up, her eyes shining with wonder. "They're naming their new library after me," she said, her voice a whisper. "The Clara Ara Whitmore Memorial Library for Young Women's Education." "Memorial?" Billy asked, alarmed. "But you're not dead." She laughed, a sound as clear and bright as the mountain air. "It's to honor the work I did, sweetheart. The teaching methods I developed. They're being used in schools all over the country now." She read on. "They want me to come for the dedication ceremony. They want our whole family to come." "Would you want to go?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet. She looked at the life she had built, the children she adored, the husband who was her anchor and her harbor. "Yes," she said finally. "I want our sons to see the life I had before, and I want the people from that life to see the family that made me whole." That evening, around the dinner table, Tommy asked her to tell them stories about her time as a teacher in Boston. She smiled, her hand resting on her belly. "I used to think that was the only life I would ever want," she began. "A world of books and ideas. But then," she said, her eyes meeting Marcus's across the table, "then I learned that the most important lessons aren't in books. They're in the courage it takes to love again after you've been broken. They're in the strength you find when you choose family over safety." She looked at the faces of her sons, then at her husband, and her heart was full. "And the most important lesson of all," she finished, "is that home isn't a place you find on a map. It's a place you build, with the people who choose you, and the love that holds you together, no matter what storms may come." If this story of a family forged by fire and faith touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got another story coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss.